Welcome back. Ethiopia, 1984, Part 2. That BBC News report we mentioned off the top, the one that triggered a global response, ran on October 24th of that year. The footage then made its way onto television screens all around the world and provoked ordinary people, politicians and celebrities into action. Within 12 months, over $100 million was raised and the foreign aid budgets of Western governments were increased. We want to take a closer look now at that initial BBC piece, because if the late MOHAMED, the Kenyan cameraman, were to shoot that same story today, the pictures would look a lot different. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on historic images from a quarter-century ago, and why famine coverage in 2009 looks and sounds so different on our screens.
Dawn, and as the sun breaks through the piercing chill of night on the plain outside Coram, it lights up a biblical famine, now in the 20th century.
The sheer power of Michael BUERK's report is something that you really cannot disregard.
Thousands of wasted people are coming here for help. Many find only death.
Until Michael BUERK and Mohamed Amin's film came out, there were very few people who knew what was going on in Ethiopia.
The way that my father shot that footage, showing the dignity of the people, the massive suffering in their eyes, and the way that they were suffering there.
15,000 children here now, suffering, confused, lost.
When the pictures of the famine in Ethiopia played out on British television screens in 1984, they jolted viewers. The shocking reality of the situation in East Africa was laid before people's eyes, and it was a reality too grim to ignore.
Coram, an insignificant town, has become a place of grief.
They had never seen anything on that kind of scale before. So I think the sheer numbers blew people away completely.
I think that the reason that Michael BUERK's piece had such impact at the time was because it was so brilliantly shot and was so dramatic.
There's not enough food for half these people. Rumours of a shipment can set off panic.
And if I can put it like this, in rather crass terms, it was like an amazing piece of cinema, but with real people really suffering in real time.
The man behind the lens was Mohamed Amin, a Kenyan cameraman. His son Salim has his own theories on why the footage his father shot was so iconic.
I've asked numerous professional camera people, why was that different to the previous images of famine and suffering we had seen coming out of Africa? And I think the fact that he was an African filming Africans, I think that kind of, that connection, that empathy came across in those pictures.
Alongside Mohamed Amin was BBC reporter Michael BUERK.
Ethiopia is turning into the worst human disaster for a decade.
His narration of the story of Ethiopia's starving millions set a benchmark for disaster reporting.
You know, it's all very well for me. I could smell it, taste it. You know, I had these close personal experiences. And you thought to yourself, how is somebody sitting in the comfort of their own living room, looking at this two-dimensional picture on the far side of the room, ever going to get the same sort of impression as I got at first hand?
You had Michael BUERK's commentary, which was very powerful, and he's used the phrase a biblical famine, and that really spoke to people. It sounded apocalyptic and showed the extent to which Ethiopia was being ravaged.
What struck me most forcibly looking at this was these people and the way they acted, the way they dressed, and their Iron Age lifestyle reminded me vividly of the kind of Bibles we used to have at school. And they all had these colour pages with rather vivid and lifelike pictures of biblical scenes. I was trying to make the point that in a year where I don't think there's ever been such a superabundance of food in the world, that in the late 20th century, a biblical type famine should be occurring.
The situation is out of control.
BUERK's report motivated news audiences in England to take notice and act.
This is ABC News coverage.
In the United States, however, Ethiopia's famine was hardly to be seen on TV screens.
The polls are closing as I think.
Initially, they actually refused the pictures, said we're not interested, it's election year, another famine in Africa, who cares? It was only when Viz News, the agency that had the pictures, pushed very hard to just satellite the pictures into New York, and it completely silenced the entire newsroom when these pictures came in.
Good evening once again from New York.
Tom Brokaw was the anchor at that time. I remember somebody turning to him and saying, if we don't put these pictures on, we shouldn't be in this business.
Mohamed Amin's footage affected viewers on both sides of the Atlantic. But were he and Michael BUERK covering a famine today, the report would likely have been very different, starting with some of the camera angles.
For example, at Save the Children, you would never ever see a picture of a child taken from above. You have to take it from the same level as the child because you're talking about the child's perspective, not a matter of an adult taking a picture down on this little victim.
I don't go along with that kind of thesis that this was some sort of visual giving away of the essential paternalism in the relationship between the reporter, the cameraman on the one side and the people on the other. If somebody's dying, they're lying down, and I don't need to be lying down with them in order to get the best shot of what's going on.
People scrabble in the dirt as they go.
It's not just the footage that would have been shot differently.
How do you feel about
The report itself would have sounded different, fundamentally different.
Just I am a witness of CORRESPONDENT.
When you see the BUERK report, there is 7 minutes, and the only people who speak in it are Michael BUERK himself and a doctor from Médecins Sans Frontières.
If there is no food...
You would never see that in a report today.
The one thing that I regret more than anything else, it never crossed my mind for a moment to interview anybody who couldn't speak English, because I knew they wouldn't use it. And the culture at the time, you know, there was no way that you would either put subtitles up on a mainstream news program or even what we call voiceover. And so consequently, all the victims, all the people the story was about were voiceless.
That was then, but even now, by today's standards, this was an iconic piece of journalism, an epic, tragic story told in a way that affected millions, from the people who gave to the lives that were saved.
More Global Village Voices now on the coverage of Ethiopia back in 1984.
I think he brought into millions of homes around the world the true visceral impact of what exactly was happening in Ethiopia. The images of the starving families and starving children brought home the true extent of the famine. Perhaps not so many crusading journalists like Michael BUERK in the world anymore, and if they are, they're not doing their jobs properly.
In 1984, the world witnessed the reality of famine on a massive scale. The footage we saw could well have been scenes from the Old Testament, but what gave this particular impact was the fact that these images were being beamed back virtually live, direct into our own comfortable and well-fed lives. Suddenly, we couldn't pretend we didn't know, or that it was all too far away to do anything about. Somebody had to do something.
Finally, you may not have heard of auto-tune,
but chances are you've heard the effects of auto-tune.
Auto-tune is something called a proprietary audio processor. It's designed to take musical performances that are flawed vocally and instrumentally and subtly correct imperfect pitch. So singers,
particularly those who can't really sing, love auto-tune.
It's become standard equipment in recording studios around the world. However, mischief makers on the internet like to use it too because they can take some of the driest political speeches or news broadcasts and presto, turn them into songs. Our web video of the week is an example of how auto-tune can upgrade news content. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Seamos un tilín mejores y un poco menos egoístas. Huele esperanza.
In this common endeavor,
Huele esperanza.
all of us work together.
We must embrace a new era of engagement because the time has come for us to be sustained. It has to be shared. The time has come.
A better world to live in for future generations everywhere.
How is the Nobel Peace Prize decide?
Well, that is what people were asking all day today.
We mix a secret potion and roll the ancient dice, then hire a focus group and have a human sacrifice.
A lot of people are asking today, why do you think the committee selected President Obama?
I believe a prize for peace should go to the biggest ones.
They're giving Obama a prize for not being George Bush.
They can smell the hope.
Take a deep breath
and hope the smelly world.
Deep breath.
A better world to live in for future generations. Everywhere.